Welcome to Fosbury Flop, a podcast for the crazy ones who are not fond of rules. A podcast about the geniuses who change the world. Abraham Maslow said, "If the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail." As coaches, we unconsciously carry a toolbox made up of our favorite ones that condition how we perceive and act in the reality we find ourselves in. As a result, we do not observe reality, but a biased image of it, conditioned by what we want to see. Craig Morris beat the game and chose not to see his reality based on his toolbox. He realized that often, the more we know, the less we see. He threw away his toolbox and embraced an ethos of not knowing, to be open to what he found, not to what he was looking for. Craig is Olympic Canoe Slalom Coach for British Canoeing, and at Fosbury Flop, he tells us how his journey has been. Craig, thanks for joining me today at Fosbury Flop.
You're welcome. It's nice to be here. Thank you, Marty.
In every conversation I have, there is a common pattern that follows before the conversation. That is usually my dad asks me, "Hey, Marty, with who are you recording next?" And 95% of the times, I tell him the name, but he never knows. But it happened that today or last week, he didn't ask me. So I would like you to start this conversation helping me to explain him how would you describe yourself and what you do to be invited to Fosbury Flop?
Oh, well, a big welcome to Marty's dad. An honor to be on your son's podcast. Thank you. I'm Craig. I was brought up in quite an urban area in the UK, and bizarrely found paddle sport as a 5-year, having a 5-year elder sibling who dragged me onto the region's canals, quite a long way away from whitewater. But we navigated our childhood, I guess, playing on rivers. And eventually I became a paddler myself. I always say an enthusiast rather than an athlete. I'm not sure I was at athletic level. Went through education, wondering what to do with myself, and found coaching basically from a couple of influential figures in the sport of canoe slalom at the time. And I found over time, it's like coaching found me, but then I found myself within coaching. I had a passion, and I do have a passion for working with people, and I'm probably almost, what would you say? It's not in a good way sometimes, addicted to learning and to growth, both personally and together with people. And I love adventure. So I'm really fortunate to be able to say that I get to do all of those things every day within my paid work, to explore and learn with people, to adventure in environments all around the world. And to just keep working on being better and knowing better each day. And we do that by floating around on water. It's quite bizarre, really.
When you mean that in your childhood you were playing in the rivers, you mean already with a kayak, canoeing?
Yeah, I say this. My dad was an early proponent of the constraints-led approach. At 5 years old, he used to tie a rope to my boat and push me out into the canal basin. And when I got a little bit too far, he'd kind of guide me away from a wall or away from the local kids who were throwing bricks or whatever. I got in a boat really young. I remember doing my first competitive race at under 8 in North Wales. So I was we'd be on the rivers all over the UK every weekend. My dad had a little rule that we had to spend more time on the river than it took to drive there and back. So, the 8-hour drive to Scotland led for a challenging cold weekend at times on the water.
I guess it should impact you to be in those environments since young.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I often find myself, even now, like nearing on 20 years of coaching, I just find myself daydreaming and staring at the movement of water. It's always like it really can put me in a trance quite easily, watching the swirls and the undercurrents and things like that. And I guess I've always been fascinated by that. My parents weren't very sporty at all, ironically. So I think largely they would facilitate an environment for us to be in by transporting us there and paying for it, and feeding us along the way when needed. But they'd let us get on with it. So we were given a lot of freedom, my brother and I and others, to just explore these environments without any sort of prescription of how to explore. And I
without adult supervision either?
No, not always. I'd say relatively safely, but I mean, times were different then. You know, I'm in my 40s now. When I was 5, I think health and safety was, very different to how it is now, particularly in the UK. But I would say we always had companions on the water who were very much more experienced than us, or in the water. And my brother being 5 years, my elder kind of was that guardian as well. But yeah, my parents, within realms of safety, I would have explored, probably more so than my kids explore now in this modern world, which is always something in the back of my head. My memories of childhood are all about just play, free play, whether it be in water, on bikes, wherever, however. And there's not often an adult there actually when I reflect on those key moments.
I was wondering, like, you are from United Kingdom, right?
Correct.
So I was wondering, like, in United Kingdom, like, why not soccer or football, or why not rugby? And now I can understand a bit better that, no? But which lessons or what did you learn in the water that maybe you couldn't have learned it in a soccer field? Have you ever asked that question, or?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I have to confess that I used to be dragged to canoe weekends because I was the captain of my local Sunday team for football when I was a teenager. And I used to get dropped intermittently as captain, or even dropped to the subs bench, because one weekend I'd be canoeing, the next weekend I'd play football. So I wasn't necessarily operating with joy to go canoeing during my teenage years. I very much loved football. And I think what that guided me to later in life, to a realization that doing things with others was really important to me. I actually think probably a better environment for me in my athletic years was probably a team sport. However, what canoeing did give me was the adventure and the travel element, which I didn't get with football, playing for a local Sunday team. I'm, my wife and I and kids, we love to travel. And that's definitely a bug that has kind of been instilled in me from my childhood with my parents. We'd basically started the 6 weeks holidays every year. We'd go off to Cornwall in the caravan, and that would be us. We'd come home with one night to wash all our clothes, and off we'd go to school. So adventure and travel and being on the move, I guess, looking for new opportunities has always been a big thing.
It's interesting for me because I always remember a teacher that I had in the sports science degree in the university, that she was saying that with her 4 kids, they didn't play soccer or different sports. They said, no, we always went in the weekends to hike, adventure, or climb. And all of us like, why? Like no, in the mountain, you don't listen people insulting at you or insulting at the referee. And that moment for me was like, wow, like, I think the lessons that you might learn in nature or can be, I don't know, but can be quite different.
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. I'm definitely, I always say my happy place is running in the mountains. I'm not a fast runner, but I just love to be up there and adventure. Second to that is probably floating on water. So there's something about that sense that you're really privileged to be there, I think, amongst something bigger than me or us. And that sense that we're able to kind of connect with nature in its rawest sense is, it's not lost on me. I always feel quite humbled by that environment.
And when you talk about water, that not like a river, it's something so like uncertain, let's say, or so, I don't know. I guess it might force you to go with the flow. So you were there since your childhood. Then let's see if I know how to formulate this question. You are as you are because how you played in your childhood, or you played as you played because you are as you are now? I don't know, like...
That's a big
philosophical question. Do you think that childhood
question.
impacted you now? Or is like, no, like...
I think it definitely did in different ways. And even when we get to a point of how I take up with coaching, probably, I feel really privileged to have never really had a strong guide. And like even when I was trying to be an athlete as a junior in Great Britain, I was never really coached that regularly or consistently. And I think that gave me quite a nice blank canvas to take up with coaching on. I had some biases, and we'll perhaps come on to those that have shaped some of the transitions or U-turns in my coaching. But I definitely think things that were in... My parents were never one to sort of have a list of values that I needed to take up with life with. You know, we wouldn't have anything on the wall. I often hear of people doing podcasts and they'll say, oh, my parents, you know, they instilled in me I need to be kind, etc. I never remember like that being done through words, through language with my parents. Yet I often reflect on the environments they put us in. We're always bound with nature, bound with others, bound in playful. And often, as I say, my parents, not necessarily particularly active people. But they always, you look back on it now, and now I'm a parent myself. They obviously sacrificed quite a lot to put ourselves, because they weren't people who would take up with physical activity in nature. They would literally position us there, and they'd be there as like a safety rail, I guess, if we needed them. But me and my brother would just play hours in the surf, in the mountains, on the rivers, with them, you know, watchful eyes on, but not necessarily actively participating with. So I guess there's been that sense that's taken up with my life that I want people to explore firsthand. And I love going with people on journeys rather than to kind of prescribed destinations, if that makes sense.
I think we will have to talk a little bit about canoe slalom. But maybe first, for all the ignorants like me, you should introduce us a little bit to the sport.
Yeah, sure. Canoe slalom. Yeah, we go downhill on whitewater, downstream, on whitewater, around gates. Effectively, there's various disciplines: canoe, kneeling up, one-bladed paddle; kayak, sitting down, which most people who have had a little go at water sports will have done that; two-bladed paddle, male and female. Yeah, and we race around a set course that is unique to every round, to every river, to every occasion. So in that, our venues are quite specific. They're quite unique. Over time, we've navigated, I guess, from natural rivers into a more sort of artificial environment as the sport has become more kind of borderline professional in the Olympic Games, and the level playing field sort of concept. I remember even 10, 15 years ago, you know, you'd do one run in the morning, and then the river would go up 2 feet in the afternoon. You'd do the second run, and the times were accumulative or compared, or it was best run counts. And, you know, there's not a lot of parity in those environments. So that's probably where some of the uncertainty or embracing uncertainty has come from. But yeah, that's our sport. So you could liken that to, I guess, downhill, kind of somewhere between downhill skiing and slalom skiing. Yeah, every slope is unique. The snow texture, weight of it is different. The course is different. Yeah, and we're a race against the clock, time and penalties, so we're not scored aesthetically. Yeah,
I find so interesting that each race is unique. Like how you train that, like.
Yeah, so there's no gold medal times or anything, which people, you know, the people who love metrics and KPIs in our sport, it drives them mad trying to find stuff to get hold of. But I love it. Yeah, I guess we're training to be skillful and to take up with new environments quickly and look for opportunities. There's a lot of guiding attention, a lot of exposure to very different environments. One aspect of the artificial world of courses now is that we can actually manipulate the riverbed with blocks and flow. So we can actually change the river day to day as well, or month to month. We can try and replicate other courses that we're preparing for. I say replicate, they're never the same. We can represent some features as best we can, but you can never copy and paste them. Yeah, so it's a fascinating world. And although it's changed so much, it's like just new opportunities become available.
For example, in the Olympics, how much time before the competition, you know how will be the race?
So we'll see the course the night before, traditionally. if you want to. Some athletes are superstitious about not wanting to do that. We'll have, so there's no practice at the highest level. You get no practice on the course, but you'll get to view the course from the riverbank, which is maybe something we'll unpick, but it's a very different perception to actually the art of doing the run itself. But we'll see it the night before. We get to watch some demonstration runs. So some paddlers, depending on the level of the competition and the level of depth within that country hosting, the ability level of the demo runners will be very different. So applying, it's a bit like, you could have Messi play football for me, but it doesn't mean I can go out and do it, or vice versa. about 15 hours before, probably roughly 12 to 15 hours before.
And what's the common, how would you say, process that the teams do in these 15 hours? Well, since when they see the course until the competing time?
Yeah, I would imagine it to be quite individual. I'd say there be some umbrella headings of what people take up with. So an athlete and or their coach will traditionally prepare the course from the bank. So we call it the course walk. How people do that will be very, very different. I know how we have gone about that has changed over time. Video will be analysed from the demonstration runners, like maybe key sections, key options on the course, key tactics.
Sorry, you see some athletes that demonstrate.
Yeah, the demonstration runners will have been, and at the highest level, then you're generally getting a very high level. Like if we go to somewhere where the country has excellent strength in depth, like Czech Republic, for example, the level of demonstration runners from the people who are not racing is still really high. You take up with analysis with the, depending on, you'll do it as yourself as a coach and athlete team, or if you're fortunate like we are, we have analysts to work with us. How I do, we'll have a look, but I will only share data with the athlete based on what the athlete wants to take up with, like what are they curious to explore and see. They will guide that process of what information we look at before. Some people will not want anything. They'll just do. There'll be an element of preparation, but I imagine the scale, if we think about it as a kind of continuum of like really prepared to kind of have a 10, 15 minute look and go, then I imagine some of the best paddlers in the world will be placed at completely polar opposites on that continuum. There's no one way of doing things that I've seen.
That's so interesting, that the best way, nothing that we don't know already, that you have to adapt to the athlete you have in order to making him feel good, not you as a coach from the riverbank feel, okay, I have done my work and we are ready, even though the athlete might be feeling worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've become more and more aware that the perspective of the athlete is the one that guides the dance when we prepare and take up with performance. Whereas perhaps a former version of me and my coaching might have been, I'm looking for them to align to a predetermined kind of route down the river that I've seen through my knowledge and experience over years. I guess we've all been on journeys within our own coaching and specific to the individual in front of me. I know I would currently work with two Olympic athletes, and I work pretty differently with each based on how they want to take up, the uniqueness they bring to the correspondence with the performance.
And for the fans, which is more or less the relevant information that you would focus on? How are the turns? How is the river? Some difficult points. What's the relevant?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're a naive kind of supporter at a canoe slalom event, and you want to know where the key sections are, just wait to see where the crowds on the riverbank of athletes and coaches are lying. You do demonstrate. So an athlete will walk the course. I'm right next to our Olympic course here in London behind me. So they'll walk the course for this weekend's selection races. And within a fleeting glance, they will know the kind of key areas where they're going to be asked to make tactical decision makings, i.e. decide on a particular intention of doing something. Now, varying levels of athletes, varying experiences might keep multiple intentions open. Yet, there'll be some decision making to make off the bank based on the analysis, based on what they've seen, based on their capabilities or perceived capabilities. And yeah, it's often about it's that balance of risk reward for us. The most direct route quite often has a high risk tariff. And that can mean that you're risking a 50-second penalty, which you're out of the race immediately, effectively, or a 2-second penalty that at the highest level can have a massive impact on your chance of winning the race. Yeah, and it's a lot, as you've talked about. We often like to kind of plan backwards or prepare backwards. How do I want to leave this key section? And therefore, what actions are invited? What information do I need to keep an eye on in terms of the water? Because as you say, the water changes moment to moment. One moment there will be a supportive wave that can hold your height upstream. The next minute it might not be there. And you can't plan for that. You have to take up with that as it emerges.
I guess it's important in the same competition, make decisions as you go down.
Yeah. And it's definitely something, Marty, that we've kind of become at ease with over time, that sense of accepting uncertainty and letting go of control. Me and Carl, who you talked about our paper earlier, we're really curious about this sense of submitting agency, submitting control of input, output to the interaction with the environment. And that's very much guided my coaching in recent years. I think there's we talked about it in the paper on the wisdom of not knowing. It's that sense that there's two sides to attention. There's one side that is kind of becoming skillfully attuned to the information that's already out there. I know there's a green gate hanging here and a red gate hanging there for us, and it looks like there's some water that's moving that way. But also the other side to it, which we've come to embrace and accept in terms of uncertainty, is that sense that we're waiting on information to present, information that's yet to emerge. And for us, that might be that, in that last phase, those final moments, we're trying to stay open to the possibility that the wave might change to invite something different to what it invited a second before. That sense of always kind of balancing the coin of attention on both sides, the information that's there and the information that's yet to present.
And how you train that? For example, the thing you said about the last wave or irrelevant, because you can make changes in the river course, but you can make it also while they are going down?
No, not in terms of that sense, but the river does that itself. The river doesn't behave in any uniform fashion. And we can design it to not behave in a uniform fashion as well. But we don't have control of it necessarily behaving in a kind of singular manner that's predictable. So I guess you become aware, and the athletes will ask me to design challenges around sections of the river that are really fluid, that have less certainty, that can really be a noise for attention. That side of the coin that's information that's there that they can't really trust because they know that information may not be there the next moment, and it may go around in patterns, but the patterns aren't reliable as well. So yeah, we dwell in those environments, those really fluid, interchangeable ebbs and flows of a whitewater environment present really nicely to actually, if we dwell in them, then in order to be skillful, we have to become more attuned to that balance of the two sides of attention.
It is something I really like, but sometimes it's harmful. When I try that in my trainings in paddle, that kind of the environment is more demanding or more surprising than the real competition. But then if I don't explain that or make a proper introduction, then it ends up lacking their confidence, and they don't understand me. So
yeah, you make a great point. And my instinctive response there is to think of the sense of periodizing skill training, something we've taken up with on the work of the back of Fabian Otte and the periodization of skills training. So it's almost the dosage of, what you've done beautifully is you've had an awareness of the dosage of complexity and how it represents or over-represents the game in paddle. And we're similar, we're obviously not in control of the course that's set at a major event. you have a sense of the level of difficulty it may or may not be. So you're guessing a little bit when you kind of overtrain complexity, or you undertrain complexity. But that awareness of a dosage and the periodization of it, given the multiple constraints on an athlete at any one time, which can be physical loads, emotional status, perceived consequence and reward from the environment, or threat and reward. So yeah, we're always having those conversations, I guess, and the athletes are very involved in the design of training. So you say they have very clear intent, very clear permissions. So yeah, so I think when we have clarity of intent between the coach-athlete kind of interaction going into a session, then that element of complexity, like you say, and the overwhelming nature of it can be bound by the permissions you've given within the session itself. So we'll often talk about kind of moving between maybe like a really explorative environment, and we'll really affirm adaptability and, in terms of bravery of exploration, and maybe a more accountable environment where we're leaning into performance a little bit more, where, kind of the constraints of the event, the time and the penalties will be more live in our discussions. And we'll have obviously dialogue as well as, I'm a big kind of proponent of what they show in the training interaction is more valuable than the dialogue post-event. But obviously there is still dialogue going on of their experience of a training environment and how they'd like to influence that moving forwards.
Is this this way of thinking or this kind of methodology predominant in canoe slalom? Because for me, what you say is that all of this is like obvious, no? Like, for example, in a football field, it's the competition field, but we can train out of context. But I don't know if you can go to the water and also train out of context, decontextualize it, isolating.
Yeah, we can, because I've done it. That's important to share. That's important to share here. I wouldn't say it's a dominant kind of pedagogy or methodology. There's a lot of people operating in this way without theoretical underpinnings. I certainly have colleagues that, and it just so happens that I anchor my practice to what I've come to take up with from theory or frameworks over time. My experience around the world is that there's probably multiple ways of doing things. And obviously with the language barrier and things, I'm reluctant to judge people's intent from just what I see. I believe I can see different approaches, but until I understand their intent, I'm not sure. But no, certainly for me, the dominant approach I was aware of was that you would try to set a rigid route and plan from the riverbank as a coach-athlete kind of dyad that the athlete would then look to deliver, almost like, just play the DVD that you'd constructed off the bank. And if you get close to it, you'll do well. I would say generally that's how most people take up with kind of preparing the event and engaging it, but not everybody. And I've come to kind of move away from that over time as I found different experiences, different jolts, and then kind of got busy with books and networking around theory that changed my approach of how, what I conceptualize coaching to be, but also thinking about what the event is backwards. And that was a big shift for me.
How did you start it? If you look back, now that we know a little bit how you approach competition. Athlete
feedback was a big one. Fortunate enough to work with some very outspoken individuals. And I mean that in a positive sense, in that they were getting frustrated with my interactions around coaching, or things I thought we were doing for the better was over constraining them away from their self and from their why of who they were and how, why they wanted to take up with paddle sport in the first place. Furthermore, I was encouraged from a few conversations to actually consider what the sport is. And I don't think I did that 10 years plus into my career as a coach. I actually never said, what is canoe slalom? What is, in terms of its rawest interaction with the performance competition run? So, if I said to you, what is basketball when you boil it down to its raw ingredients. I guess it's an invasion sport, and the objective is to score more than the opponents. And that's kind of the questions I asked. And what does that mean for decision making? What defines the most skillful people in our domain? And the word adaptable kept coming up to me. They're adaptable. They're really adaptable. They can do many things, many ways, many times, seemingly like they keep options open for as long as possible, better than anyone else. And particularly in response to that dialogue I had with myself was, I'm not coaching people to prepare those skills in that way. And that was like a massive slap in the face. Quite hard hitting, took a while to kind of work through, if I'm honest, and some deep conversations with colleagues, with athletes. The realization that we weren't preparing athletes in line with what I thought was skillful canoe slalom paddling was a big one. I was trying to manipulate athletes to a model of the sport that I had that wasn't in good marriage with what it actually was, I think, which is a more adaptable environment.
I don't know if coaches in general realize how much we can help, but also how much we can harm. Like for me, like at the beginning, I was forcing my players to be as my monkey mind wanted.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
When you realize it's like how selfish.
Yeah, that's it. I definitely had, I always say the younger me was the jigsaw, the box cover of the jigsaw painted the picture of what I knew canoe slalom performance to be, or good canoe slaloms before. And anyone stepping into my coaching group was simply going to be at the behest of me moving the jigsaw pieces and fitting them into it, which when I look back on, it doesn't sit well with me at all. I did it with good intent. I don't think I had malice with it, but I've changed a lot since then. And it's now more of like a companionship, where once I would have been specifying on two others my model of canoe slalom and they had to fit within it. Now it's kind of this sense of guiding them toward a field of information that they have freedom and exploration to take up with the how and the what themselves. And that's definitely more in line with kind of, I guess, like an ecological approach.
For me, it gives me like less anxiety when Albert Batalla, a guest that I had in the podcast, he said like the things I criticized 15 years ago, now, the things I defended 15 years ago, now I would criticize almost them. But they weren't false. They were improvable. So they were needed in order to be who I am now.
Yeah, I can really empathize with that. I really can. Like, I don't have any regrets. I think I've always had positive intent. Just, things that have taken up with over time, jolts, feedback, critical friends, athletes. There's no better development than coaching, right? Actually coaching on the court or on the grass or on the river. And I've been fortunate enough to have some long-term relationships where the invitation for challenge and support is both ways. It's reciprocal. But I would agree with that. Like I am who I am because of what I've done and what I've taken up with and the environments I've been in. And I don't know if this is who I will remain. Hopefully not. A lot of people say to me, I say I currently lean into these approaches. And I say that because, well, I didn't always, and I'm not closed-minded enough to think that I always will. Hopefully I will evolve as approaches and science evolves over time and depending upon who I'm working and these sort of things. But an example for me would be how I used to view movement variability. I used to view variability of movement as a massive error. I remember saying, the athletes around, so my biomechanical model of how to move around a gate wasn't delivered by an athlete. And they'd go, but it was fast, wasn't it, Craig? Which is the task, as I come to see that. Like, that is the task. It's just to be fast. And I'm like, but could you do it again? And it's like, well, they only need to do it twice. And it doesn't matter how it looks. They got it done. But so I would have the deficit detective lens on regarding that movement variability and almost ascribe it to luck. Like, it was a lucky effort. Now, how they must have felt when, they just skillfully really smashed a section and the outcome data was really tip top. And here was me going, yes, but. And now I would definitely be celebrating in terms of affirmation, like the bravery or the exploration of that, and leaving channels of doing open, whereas I used to close them off really rigidly, I think.
I really like in the episode with Rob Gray that I think you say that you had to apologize a lot at the beginning. And I found that like, wow, like, no, looks like we can't be wrong or we can doubt or say, yeah, that's right. Sorry, I was wrong. Like, okay, at least somebody can apologize.
I think my coaching is one long apology, Marty. An ongoing apology over time.
Or yeah, at the end you feel such an insecurity and you say, hey, try that, eh? And if not, I apologize, but I suggest that might be good.
I think so. And there's two sides to that, firstly, I see vulnerability as a strength. There's no perfect way of doing things. Nobody has the solutions to all the problems. So inevitably, we might see better options or know better over time. Therefore, apologies are just a natural kind of reflective tool for me. But what it has done is, I guess, some people will say, well, how does the athlete respect you if you're apologizing, and you're showing weakness? It's like, but I want them to have that level of vulnerability when they take up with the task and accept certainty and be open to growth over time. But we've definitely had that kind of give and go relationship to be able to do that. And that's really important. The other side of it is, in terms of the respect, is I hope they know, and I hope I'm committed and not just blowing my own trumpet here, but like I'm deeply committed to kind of going after excellence and growth. So if I don't know, I'll say I don't know. I'm like committed to going and finding out together, and I'll do everything in my power to do that, and probably, work way too much and not spend enough time at home and all these things. So there's that, like the level of vulnerability is matched by a ruthless pursuit of knowing better together, if you know what I mean. And I think that balances out that vulnerability with a committed kind of response.
For me, I really like it, this approach, because now I'm in academy, in which I would say most of coaches would be from another approach, no? In which they are on top. So many of the players we coach, so they grow up believing that they just have to do what they are told to. So then when I can be with some of them and just ask, just reflect, or what do you feel, or like, I don't know, just try it and tell me, then it's like this puts me credibility away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we've got to be. Well, we've got to pay attention in coaching. What you've described is there that you know the history of where people coming onto your court are coming from and looking to go to. And we have to pay attention. That we'd be naive to start a really, what people might call like soft pedagogy or hands off. I don't like that approach because, we work incredibly hard to coach. Even if we coach through an ecological approach, it's incredibly hard work. So it's not hands off by any means in the broader sense of the word, but we need to meet people where they're at. And if we weren't, and I kind of see things, there's a lot of hard lines and hard boundaries that go on Twitter, on podcasts, the skill acquisition world, that I just really don't have much time for, because I always root back to, well, we are here in existence to service the people doing the doing. Like, we're here for athletes. And these hard boundaries are not helpful, and they're not actually looking after the general humane needs of athletes or wants. So in that respect, I often think about, you've got to meet people where they're at, and you've got to have kind of like the next level of stretch that's acceptable that they can take up with. And you move over time. Like, so to take someone from, a very rigid top-down approach environment to go to a completely kind of explorative environment will be too overwhelming. The shift in the constraints and the level of information will be. So it's about kind of discussing together and moving with people over time and expanding. And I'm fortunate enough to have done that in my coaching. There's people who I used to coach who would tell you, I just want to be told what to do. And where we met in the middle as we both grew was kind of what we saw as the demands of the sport. The demands of the sport. Well, if I tell you what to do, then you just act on something that's already established. Is that what the most skillful, high-performing people are doing in the sport? Well, no, they're not. Therefore, that approach alone isn't going to work in order to get the best from you over time. So, yeah. And there's a balance. I also hate campaign against this sense of coaching for redundancy. I enjoy coaching. I don't want to be redundant. But your relationship evolves over time, and which role you will play in that companion kind of conceptualization or that Sherpa on the shoulder differs over time, I think.
No, completely agree. Actually, I was thinking that, hey, Martí, if you read all the theory, but your players are still think that you are wrong or you are not so maybe you have to adapt. And it was funny because I was finding me doing some things that at the end is what you say, we are here to help them, but that maybe I wouldn't believe.
And I see, like you got me talking then, and I'll try not to get into the wars of pedagogical approaches, but for me, a theory isn't telling me how I can and cannot coach, or an approach, or a science isn't telling me that. It's an anchor of reference for me. I lean into particular ones. And, people who tell me I can't be instructive in that pedagogy or whatever, I don't really listen to that in a sense. I just anchor my reference as a few principles of coaching, and that gives me a reflective tool. So if I do find myself instructing, then I'm saying, okay, well, what were the pros and cons of that? Why did I make that decision? Did I close off too many things at that point? Was it needed? And I asked the question, obviously, of the person doing the doing. How was that for you? Like, oh, well, I felt like you limited. I was really looking forward to exploring something, and then I thought I needed to align to what you were thinking, and then I got, and suddenly it became a bit too much. Or it can be like, I really needed that little scaffold there. But my anchor of reference which is important to me, is like, I always say theory is my kind of coach on the shoulder. We don't coach together much in our sport. So it is my companion in coaching effectively. It's my coach developer, if you will.
That sounds great. And I wanted to ask you about that, because maybe now you could summarize a bit your paper on the wisdom of not knowing, but you made me think of how would you say it, in the debate you make around labeling, knowledge about, knowledge of.
Yeah, that's kind of been Gibson's work in terms of ecological psychology has been a good guide for me, I think, amongst others over time. So this sense of knowledge about being kind of mediated and indirect, secondhand, if you will, the sort of stuff we might get from a book. I've got a canoe slalom book to my left here, Spanish actually. You'd be impressed, Marty. Spanish text. Guides, technical models, maybe even video to a degree, depending on how it's used. Telling us how to do things, if you will, from a kind of removed, mediated perspective. And this sense of knowledge of, which is kind of dwelling within the environment, taking up with things as they emerge. It's like the doing sense, if you will. And I think both are important. That's key to say. But I would once have lent really hard into the knowledge of outside because I had prescriptive models of what the sport should be. They were removed in terms of they weren't doing because I wasn't doing. I was presenting them through abstract models. And I've I think that is like submissive now to the knowledge of the event. And I'm fascinated about coaching perspective now and how it's different from first person perspective. I actually tried our new sport, kayak cross, this week, and that gave me, an overwhelming insight into the challenges of that sport. But in that paper, I guess the knowledge of about things kind of underpins a few concepts of that paper, but we really lean into three, I guess, key headings, which is the concepts of paying attention, knowing better, and guidance without specification. And they are three things, I guess, three kind of principles of my coaching that have really evolved over time. And I'll be really honest here publicly that paper was nothing but a really nice reflective reflective piece from me, and I was quite selfish about writing that. Carl gave me the platform to do that, which I'm really grateful for. And I'm very, very thankful for our ongoing correspondence. It's kind of science to practice. But it helped me kind of make sense of the journey I've been on in coaching and lean into the kind of that interaction with theory. So yeah, and I'm quite philosophically minded. So leaning into the likes of the work of Dewey and Reed and Gibson and things like that kind of makes sense to me in coaching. They guide my attention moving forwards.
It made me think on how the context we nowadays live with so many information can play against us at the time of coaching.
I think so. Yeah, we talk in that paper around this sense of, and it came from like a poet's writing actually, the sense talking about observing birds and things. It's like that sense, the more you know, the less you see. Like we talk a lot in our athlete connections around this sense of presence, which is really playing that game of the two sides of attention, attuning to what's there, but waiting on what's yet to emerge. And I think when we have too much information, we kind of ascribe labels or patterns. It's almost like what we see is the knowledge, is our own knowledge itself. We kind of run straight into it rather than actually paying attention to what is. And I think when we work with athletes, in my experience, like really letting, in the outcome of becoming better at this for me over time has been that it lets practice breathe and it lets athletes breathe and use their own agency to take up with different aspirations rather than kind of funneling them in too early to a particular route of problem solving or whatever it might be. And that sense of presence is really important to kind of, avoid that sense of you just, the way I used to coach, it was patronizing, I think, because the athletes were basically trying to find a route to my knowledge. And I'm thankful enough that some of them told me it was patronizing. Just tell me what you're thinking because this is ridiculous. I feel like a guinea pig in a lab,
It happened to me last week coaching that they were performing in paddle the volley.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, one moment. And the first player made the example of the volley. And I wanted to talk about the volley because the result of that volley, it was rebounding a lot in the wall, so they couldn't defend it easily. So then the player made a volley, and then I went, okay, now I do it. And I did, of course, the volley I wanted, just to make them think of what's more functional, what's less. And I asked them, what's the difference? And they told me, that your preparation is higher, that you put the racket like this. And I say, no way. Look at the game, not at the models that we put in their head.
Well, that's fascinating. But that's a really great example of, where their attention is, isn't it? And maybe tells you a little bit about where they've come from, their environments of practice. I mean, I'm just utterly impressed that you can actually demonstrate paddle. I definitely can't demonstrate my level of paddle to add any value other than humor to my athletes. That's for sure.
Craig, I prepared a small questionnaire of questions that can be short or that if you want, you can extend more. But there are questions that I don't find in your papers, in other episodes, and that I think are interesting to know from such a philosophical coach or reflective. So let's go with the Fosbury questionnaire.
Let's do it.
Why you coach?
I coach for the sense of adventure, going on a journey with others that is bigger than one I perceive I can go on myself.
A talent you have as a coach?
Talking.
And a trait you would like to have as a coach?
Patience. More patience.
The FC Barcelona coach Pep Guardiola, when he was here in Catalonia, he said that the moment that made his work was worth it was when he closed himself at his small room analyzing videos. And at some point he said, okay, I have it. Tomorrow we win. sometimes they lost, but he felt that in that detail, they would win. And the question is, what's your Guardiola moment coaching canoeing slalom?
Yeah, interesting. Maybe an anti-Guardiola moment for me. I'm not motivated by winning. Genuinely not. The athletes know that, so it's nothing public. I'm happy to go on their journey because it's important to them. My moments are all about kind of, growth, collaboration. So it's often about like a real shift in like behavior or intention that athletes kind of astonish themselves with over time, and that I may have played a small part in, however big or small. It's not attributing attachment to it with pride or anything, but yeah. So it's when they start to believe, or when they start to really embrace uncertainty, or be confident in. Quite often, Marty, actually, it's about when they let go of themselves as athletes, determining who they are as people. Like those would be big moments to stand out, where they actually kind of separate the two in terms of, I am Craig and I choose to be an elite athlete. Not I am Craig the elite athlete. Because those things for me give an excellent perspective over time, and they really invite you to throw everything into your athlete performance. Because that level of fear and anxiety that if I, in inverted commas, fail, it determines who I am, has been watered down or dissolved fully.
How important it is to naturalize failure or errors or?
I'm really particular about language and get accused of being a pedant at times or semantics, but failure for us, I guess, interesting. The way we take up with practice and coaching now is like failure isn't an often used language, because, it's like that difference between being astonished and surprised, which Tim Ingold, the anthropologist, looks at a little bit. It's that sense of, in order to fail, you kind of have to have a predetermined understanding of what success is, right? Or you have to have some sort of roadmap. And that's, for me, like being surprised is like, I'm surprised because there's an outlier from what I expected, whereas being astonished is fascinating to me because it's like, well, I had no expectation. I'm just it's like for me when what did I watch on YouTube the other day? My daughter gives me a rounded YouTube education. Oh, I think it was like some sort of base jump off a bike or something. And I was just, just like no kind of information in my head, in my experiences prepared me for what I saw. Just jaw dropping.
It's like what Kelvin and Hope said, that I find my life is a lot easier the lower I keep everyone's expectations.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's true. But is so let's say to whatever they call failure, if you don't have it as a failure, but a part of the path, how much changes the journey? I feel.
Yeah. And it's, again, I love to see things on a continuum. I don't know if that's right or wrong. It doesn't matter to me. So failure could be reframed as, this sense that there is a more optimal solution out there that I can search for. Because often the language of failure then becomes this sort of non-specifying source of information for me that goes back into the loop of acting in the future. We're very careful about language in that sense. And it's not easy to kind of work with athletes to let go of this concept of failure, right? They know a level that... Go on.
It just happened to me yesterday. I was talking about aggressiveness in the match. For me, aggressiveness was not allow your opponents to hurt with their shots. And for the kids, aggressiveness was how powerful went the ball. So they say, no, Marty, what you say is not aggressive, is functional. But aggressive... Yeah. They were just labels we put.
Yeah, task functionality. I love that. And that's, I definitely... We kind of bound our reflections on coaching now in like task backwards. So it's like rather than movement forwards. That's been a big shift. But that sense of we would once have dismissed failure, like where once I might have gone, well, that wasn't very good because you did that. It's like, well, firstly, they knew it wasn't very good. They don't need me double comboing that feedback on them. That's not helpful. But now it's like, okay, there might be more optimal solutions out there. That'll come through a discussion between us and guided by them. It might be a sense of like, what did you see in order to do what you did? What information was there that made you do X, or that led to that passage through the gate? So it's exploring it and dwelling in it rather than just dismissing it as well, because then it just becomes something on the continuum, right? It's like, okay, there might be something else to pay attention. We can have a go at that and see if that gives a better solution over time in that unique context. So yeah, failure is not a word I hope you hear me say very often. It's this sense of it living on a continuum of optimal, but obviously we don't have really any certainty of what optimal is, because I'm astonished regularly, and the astonishment comes when people find very new creative solutions to problems, right? And that's when it blows people's minds and they perform at the highest level.
The most appreciated achievement, it doesn't need to be a medal or a trophy.
Oh, I mean, being invited by athletes to share their Olympic journey is pretty special. I'm approaching Paris now for the second time, and I say that very carefully. Like, I'm not arrogant enough to think that because I coach them, when they qualify, they'll want me to go with them. So that sense of being invited on a journey that is so important and so rich to their personal growth and development over time is massive. A second one would be retrospective, and I won't name names, but I've had athletes retire who, after a little bit of reflection time, have commented how the time in our environment that we created together was the most rich and enjoyable time they've had in their lives. And they only realized that when they finished and reflected backwards, which was good feedback from me. It's like, okay, how do we make sense of that on the journey?
I see in you a reflective person, coach, constantly questioning. So I was curious about if the process to preparing the Tokyo Games are the same or has changed a lot to these Paris Games.
Yeah, significant changes, I'd say, with some threads that are still ongoing. We have a new sport to prepare for. So one of the athletes I work with now, we do have a new Olympic discipline, and it is a completely different sport.
We have to prepare another episode for kayak cross.
Yeah, we do. We do. We could
I had it in the notes, but...
Yeah, fascinating. What a sport. Incredible. So yeah, obviously we're only 3 years on because it was a short Olympic cycle. Yeah, we're all different. We're all taking up with different things in our careers. The athletes, one's over 30 now, one's approaching 30. So there's that sense of going to your second games is maybe different. It's important that, for the two athletes I work with, we're really, really attuned to not a sense of retribution. They didn't finish where they wanted to finish in the previous games. But we're looking at that, providing information that we've taken up with over time, not a retribution or a revenge attack at these games. We're doing something similar, but in very different ways, I would say. So increasingly, they are leading their programs now, I would say, leading their entire teams. We still lean into skills periodization at the forefront of how we take up with environments over different timescales. And we're really, really foot to the floor on this commitment to have fun on the journey, and really committed to how they want to experience the Olympic Games. And if they answer around it being performance, then we go much deeper, because it's about that sense of how would the 16-year-old you want to feel through this process? Because you never know when it gets taken away from you, right?
An unpopular opinion about training. It can be of your own sport or in general.
Popular opinion from our training.
I guess that from such a reflective coach, it might be hard to just choose one. You must have a bag.
Yeah, no. I would say that high volume has a linear relationship to progression. is a reasonably held truth or myth. I think there's way more complexity to that relationship than meets the eye. To a degree, that the sense that developing things in impoverished contexts, so for us, maybe flat water environments will transfer to the racing environment of whitewater. I'm less convinced of that than I used to be from my experience over time and my research. I guess it's not to say I won't do it, but I'm much more aware of the kind of potential benefit and cost of spending time in different areas.
Person that most impacted your methods?
The athletes that I've been fortunate enough to work with, without question. Yeah, they've guided my attention. And thankfully, sometimes with a soft approach, sometimes with a rocket, both of which have been effective.
A person you would like to have the chance to learn from?
Oh, good question. Chance to learn from. I mean, I've been fortunate to have access to some wonderful people who give way more of their time than they should. So it's quite abstract, but one person I've always been fascinated to meet, and I do think he would have an influence on my practice, is someone called Michael Palin. He's an actor and an author in the UK. He was in Monty Python, one of the co-writers back in the day, and he's effectively a travel journalist, I guess, and public speaker these days. I've just been, the way he takes it with adventure and is so reflective and compassionate in the way he kind of engages with very, very different environments, you know, whether he's going into a war zone or somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I recently read his book when he toured Iraq. I'd just be fascinated to kind of get a deeper insight into how he engages with relationships and how he kind of continually seems to grow into different personas over time.
How important relationships are, and at least me, sometimes how little attention I pay.
Yeah, they're everything for me, Marty. I think, like, I look back on my own paddling and a lack of relationships makes sense to why I didn't really put my foot to the floor of commitment. And yeah, they're everything in coaching, to the point where, coaching will always have, hopefully, people, I was asked to do a forum on AI the other week. It's like, if it takes over from the coach, well, there we are. But yeah, you cannot replace relationships and that kind of sense of empathy and connecting with and engaging with kind of the giving and receiving of offers. And that for me is skillful coaching, and long may it continue. And when that kind of flame starts to go out, I think it's time for me to go out.
Looking back, what makes you say, I would have done this different?
Experience probably tells me that I would have done something different. Yeah, I don't have, as we discussed earlier, I don't have regrets, because everything that I've done that I would now maybe take up with differently has influenced how I sit talking to you now, and how I'll leave the room and what I pay attention to as soon as I walk out. So yeah, I'm not one to dwell in regret or difference. Like I think we make decisions with good intent on the information we've got available to us at the time, with who we are and how we are at that time and who we are with. And I'm not going to beat myself up about things over time. What I am really diligent and kind of forthright about is take up with things better as a result of those experiences in the future.
It's curious because when I was coaching basketball, I would have done this different now knowing it. But I think that if I wouldn't have done that, now I couldn't say this. Yeah. So it's like, I can admit it, but at the same time, don't feel regret. Because probably it's part of the continuum.
And that's very honest, I think. I think the only unease that sits with me with that is that experience over time has told me that I didn't individualize my coaching to the athletes that I worked with for the first 10 years of my career. And whilst I think we had reasonable relationships, there's that sense of unease that I could have done better for them. Like I could have understood them, could have represented how they took up with the world and really moved with them and not fit them into my jigsaw. Yeah, that is, again, part of who I am. And thankfully, a lot of those people I know have gone on to be extremely successful individuals in other walks of life. And so hopefully I didn't ruin their progression.
Contradiction of what you believe and what you do?
Oh. I place high value on observation in coaching, and yet I still talk too much.
A doubt you have in mind?
I think, are we paying attention to the right things? There's an ongoing doubt in coaching, and yet I think it's a strength. I think if it wasn't there, we wouldn't be doing our jobs. We'd be complacent, and I have been in that position before. So yeah, there's always that slight unease. Are we paying attention to the right things? And that can be like literally during a performance or broadly across the things we're going after towards an Olympic Games.
Significant change of belief?
Positioning and how I conceptualize the role of a coach. Yeah, from a person disseminating knowledge and information onto others, to one who dwells in not knowing, who moves with others, and looks to know better over time. Yeah, we always say I'm fortunate enough to have a really strong performance team around us, and kind of try to dwell in like a flat or no hierarchy, really, where we've got these permissions to challenge each other across our disciplines or perceived expertise in disciplines. I guess just humility in coaching. Away from a dictatorship, if you will. I don't think I ever operated a dictatorship as such, but definitely a lot more humility in my coaching now.
A challenge to fulfill?
Well, I'm kayaking the Grand Canyon this year for my good friend and former colleague's 60th birthday, and I have not done very much canoeing in the last 10 to 15 years. That would be one that I have on the carrot, on the thread. Another big one would be a real dream one for me is that I'd like to walk the entire Trans-Himalayan Highway, which would need many years of work. But I love the mountains, and having been fortunate enough to travel to the Himalaya, that is my happy place. So one day, maybe, if life feels right and I can commit to spending maybe a couple of years in the Himalaya, that would be something I'd love to do.
And the last one, a life motto?
A live motto. Ooh. Prepared but not planned.
I knew this one. I would have won 1 million, I guess.
You should have put all your crypto on it, Marcy.
Right. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Very enjoyable afternoon. Thank you, Marty.
With your humble comments, with your honest point of views, I could feel like the great professional you are. So I'm really grateful that we could have spent this time chatting together.
Me too. Thank you. It's been very joyful. I've smiled a lot. My face aches a little bit, actually, which is always a good sign from a correspondence with you. I wish you all the best moving forward.
Thank you, Craig. I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Go to fosburyflop.blog to check the notes of the episode, its written version, and much more content. If you want to support the project through the website, you can make Fosbury Flop possible and check what benefits you get.